I did a little desk remodel the other day when I was really bored on a Zoom webinar I had to be on for school. So yeah, let me know if you guys like it, if you like the new look. Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. My name is Frankie. Today I have for you guys a wrap up for the month of August. I almost said July. For some reason I have just been thinking that I'm actually like a month behind where I actually am. So I was like planning this wrap up and I accidentally called it my July wrap up, and then I called my TBR my August TBR, but that is wrong. We are in the month of September fully right now, and I need to accept that. In the month of August, I read 10 books. I read 4 YA fantasies, 2 YA contemporaries, 2 nonfiction, and 2 classics. I got a good chunk of books done, but I did not really read a ton of books that I planned to read at the beginning of the month in my August TBR, which you can check out if you haven't already. Basically, I had a ton of books come in from the library, so I wanted to get through those before I, had to turn them in. So I ended up like interrupting my TBR with a bunch of library books, which was, fun. So I did not get through a lot of the books, and you'll see in my September TBR, which I'm planning on posting right after I post this video, that a lot of the books carried into that TBR and what I want to read next month. But that is not what you are on this video to watch. This is my August wrap up, so let's talk about the books I read in August. The first book that I read in the month of August was The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. This is a YA contemporary novel told in verse that follows a young Dominican woman as she grows up with a complicated relationship with her mother and starts to find herself and her voice in poetry and spoken word. I gave this book 5 stars. I listened to the audiobook, which, as I'm sure you've heard, is amazing, and what you've heard is correct. I loved the audiobook so much. I thought the verse and the poetry within the book and the way that it was told was excellent. I thought it was such a smart way to tell the story, and you really felt invested and involved in the main character Xiomara's life because of that, and because you were reading her art directly. I thought that was a really effective choice. I also thought the characters were so well-rounded and so intricate. Everybody talks about how amazing this book is, and frankly, they're all right. This book was brilliant, and I highly recommend it to anybody who has somehow managed not to read it already. The next book that I read this month was We Real Cool by Bell Hooks. This is a nonfiction book about Black masculinity and how Black men are harmed by white patriarchal society. I didn't give this book a rating because I don't give nonfiction books that I read a rating, but I thought it was very interesting. I thought Bell Hooks' theses were really intriguing, and I found myself learning a lot as well about things that I had maybe never considered before, and about Black men and their place in America's white patriarchal society. And I think that it is definitely a really interesting read if that sounds like something you would be interested in learning more about as well. Next up on the list, I read Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo. This is a YA fantasy sequel to Six of Crows, which follows the events of that book, obviously. I gave this book 4 stars. I'm going to be honest, I liked Six of Crows better than I liked this book, despite the fact that I heard so much that Crooked Kingdom is better than Six of Crows. I think because I heard that so often, I went into this book with some expectations. Like, I was really expecting it to be a 5-star read, and I think that having those expectations kind of made my experience less good, I guess. It definitely was still a good book. I mean, I gave it 4 stars, but it just wasn't as incredible as I was expecting. I liked how there were multiple heists going on in this book as opposed to just the one going on in Six of Crows, because the heist was my favorite part of Six of Crows, and so having multiple of them in this book I thought was really good. The reason this book is 4 stars instead of 5 stars is I found myself as I was reading that I was starting to care less and less about like half of the characters, namely Kaz, Jesper, and Mateus, and then more about the other half of the characters, Inej, Wylan, and Nina. And that sort of like made me less invested in their subsequent relationships and in what was happening to them in the story. This is like a much more individual story. There are like more individual things going on with the characters as opposed to all of them working together to do something, and so I think that being less invested in those 3 characters sort of made my experience less good. Also, something that probably tainted my experience reading this book is that I was pretty significantly spoiled before I read it from book Twitter, which is my own fault for reading this book so late, but I did get a spoiler for a pretty significant plot element at the very end of the book that I think definitely had a hand in me caring a little bit less about certain characters. And that is probably also a reason why I just did not have as good of an experience as I was anticipating with this book. But still, 4 stars, you know. I have one more thing to say about this. I know I've gone on for a while with Crooked Kingdom, but I am just gonna say, I've heard a lot of people say that they don't think this duology should become a trilogy, which it's going to, you know, but I actually disagree. I do think I want a little bit more time with these characters to like really suss out their relationships and their development and stuff, and I'm actually looking forward to reading the 3rd book because I do think that it definitely has a place in this series. I can see why people think it doesn't, but I personally would love to read the 3rd book, and I'm looking forward to doing that. Next, in August, I read Persuasion by Jane Austen. This is a classic about a pair of lovers who are separated after the main character, Anne Elliot, is persuaded out of accepting an engagement from Captain Wentworth, the other person in the pair of lovers, and then it follows them after Captain Wentworth returns and is like renting out the Elliots' as like property basically, and they find themselves thrown together again and like kind of like falling in love again. I gave this book 4 stars. I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was really good. It was really funny at times. Jane Austen has such like a interesting way of being funny that I find myself really appreciating when I'm reading classics, because you know I don't get that out of a lot of classics a lot of the time. I also really like the romance. I thought it was really nice, really sweet. This book was also pretty short for an Austen, which I did really appreciate, and I also think that it is a good place to go with Jane Austen once you're done with Pride and Prejudice. You can check out this book. I think it's a pretty natural progression, and I would definitely recommend it. Next up, the past month, I read White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. This is a anti-racist nonfiction book about why white people ignore and refuse to participate in discussions about race. Like I said, I don't give nonfiction books ratings, so I didn't give this any stars, but I did think that this book was really informative and a really valuable place to start in like my personal anti-racist education, especially like for white people. This really forced me to confront my own discomfort with discussions about race, and it also gave me a lot of tools to sort of overcome what Robin DiAngelo describes as white fragility, and I really think that it was definitely a really valuable read, and I'm really glad that I did get to it. Next up this month, I read Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. This is a classic about a boy who is kicked out of the private school that he goes to, and he basically goes to New York and kind of just like wanders around causing trouble, I guess. I gave this book 3 stars. I was really rolling my eyes a lot during this book. I mean, like, obviously it's like discussed quite often that Holden Caulfield, the main character, is such a dick. He is so annoying, and he is such a misogynist, and he makes stupid decisions, and I really found myself struggling to sympathize with him throughout the majority of the book. And while I was reading this, the entire time basically, I was like, this is gonna be a 2-star read. And then I got to the end, and the end, I will say, was strangely poignant. It actually did do the impossible and make me sympathize with Holden Caulfield a little bit. And because of that, I had to bump it up to 3 stars morally. I really didn't want to, but I really did like the end of this book. And, you know, because of that, it was 3 stars instead of 2. Still think that, you know, it's not really worth picking up personally. I wanted to see what all the fuss was about and what all the high school teachers liked so much about this book, and frankly, I could not tell you. If you don't have to read this for mandatory high school reading, I would skip it. Next up this month, I read The Fascinators by Andrew Eliopoulos. I think that's how you say it. This is a YA fantasy set in a world that's just like ours, except everybody has like magical powers. It's about a group of teenagers who are in their school's magic club, and then they get accidentally tangled up in this sort of magical cult, I guess would be the best word for it. I gave this book 3 stars as well. I thought this was good. I thought it was nothing more than that, nothing less than that. You know, the plot was okay, the characters were okay. I thought the romance was a little bland, so I didn't really care about it that much. This was definitely like an easy, fluffy, quick read, and nothing really more than that, and I didn't really have a lot to say. It wasn't super memorable, but yeah. Next up in August, I read Girl Serpent Thorne by Melissa Bashardust. This is a YA fantasy based on Persian mythology, which follows a princess whose skin is poisonous, and she can basically kill anybody who touches her. I gave this book 3.5 stars. I was really conflicted about the rating and about this whole book in general, I would say. There were so many parts that like I really liked, namely the world, and like how it was like influenced by mythology. I thought that was super cool. I don't know a lot about Persian mythology, but I didn't really have to, you know. It was really well explained and the world was really well fleshed out. I really enjoyed the writing style as well. I feel like in YA fantasy books like this, it's kind of easy to fall into like an overly flowery writing style trap, you know, but I definitely think that Melissa Bashardus did a really good job with not falling into that trap, and I really liked the writing style that she ended up using for this book. I thought it was really good. The parts that I didn't like about this book though, I thought that the pacing felt weird and too quick in a lot of places, especially when it came to developing relationships between the characters. I really enjoyed the characters themselves, but I felt like they didn't get enough time to believably develop. And I actually think this book could have been like 100 pages longer, and we would have gotten some more like meaningful development from these characters, which I really wanted to see because I really liked them. Second to last book that I read this month was Pet by Akwaeke Emezi. This is a YA utopian novel about a girl who lives in a world where all evil has been destroyed until she accidentally awakens a creature from her mother's painting that enlists her help in hunting down a monster or somebody who is committing evil. I gave this book 5 stars. This book sort of defies interpretation and description, really. It's very abstract, very metaphoric, and very weird, but like weird in the best way possible. It has so many interesting things to say, and it really makes the reader think about evil, about their own society, about the people in their own society, all of that sort of thing. It's like hard to articulate why I liked this book, really, just because it's hard to articulate anything about this book. But I do really, really, really highly recommend it for anyone, basically, just because it is such a really interesting, really well-crafted story, and I really, really loved it. Finally, the last book that I read in the month of August that I just finished yesterday, actually, is I Wish You All the Best by Mason Deaver. This is a YA contemporary about a non-binary teenager that is kicked out of their parents' home after they come out, and they have to move to a new school for their last semester of high school. I gave this book 3 stars. I think that this book was very sweet and relatively lighthearted despite the sort of dark synopsis that I just gave. I also think books with this kind of non-binary teenage representation are really important and obviously have a really important place in young adult fiction. But despite all those things, I just don't really think that this book was like my thing. I think that I'm sort of growing out of like fluffy teen romance, you know. I enjoyed reading about Ben, the main character, coming to terms with their identity, and their relationship with their parents was also a really interesting thing that I think that the book navigated really well. But that was kind of only half the book, and the other half of the book was like a romance that I didn't find myself very invested in. I really do think that I'm sort of not as big of a fan of teen romances as I used to be. I don't know, I can't really explain why, but I did used to like them a lot, and now I guess they just seem to not really be doing it for me, so unfortunately that's why I gave this book 3 stars. I really wanted to like it, and I don't really have anything bad to say about it necessarily, but that's just how it goes, I guess, sometimes. Okay, those are all of the books that I read in the month of August. Leave a comment below if you have read any of the books I mentioned and what you thought of them. Also be sure to like the video if you enjoyed, and subscribe if you have not already. I'm going to be putting out my September TBR probably literally as soon as this video is uploaded, so keep an eye out for that. And I think that is everything that I had to say, so thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in a few minutes in my September TBR.